Hey guys and girls, I'm here with the beginning of our final unit, which is prices, which is basically combining supply and demand. So our essential question for this unit: how does supply and demand work together to result in a price that both sides can agree on? That's called the equilibrium price, and we'll get to that. So we're going to cover section 1 today, which is equilibrium and price controls. Major objectives will explain how supply and demand create a balance in the marketplace. We'll describe what happens to prices, quantities demanded, and quantities supplied when equilibrium is disturbed. We'll identify 2 ways that the government intervenes in markets to control prices and restricts the use of individual property. And lastly, we'll analyze the impact of price ceilings and price floors on the free market. So let's start off. So what is equilibrium? It's the point of balance at which the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. At this point, the equilibrium point, the market for a good is stable. To find the equilibrium price and quantity, we just simply look at the price at which the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded, or the price and quantity at which the two curves intersect. Both buyers and sellers benefit when the market is at equilibrium. So we can just find this by comparing the two schedules. If we look at a supply and demand schedule, as you can see here, we have the different prices, we have the quantities demanded, quantities supplied. The point where they intersect or have the same quantity demanded and quantity supplied is 200, and that's at the price of $1.50. So that's the equilibrium. When we have a higher quantity demanded than quantity supplied, we have a shortage from the excess demand. When we have a higher quantity supplied than a quantity demanded, we have a surplus because we have an excess supply. There's a graph, just like we've done demand and supply graphs all year. At this point now, we're just putting them on the same graph, and the point where they intersect is equilibrium. See, quantity supplied and demanded, 200, price 150. So we're basically just taking everything we've learned already and just combining it. So it's actually not as difficult as it may look. So what are the effects of disequilibrium if we have a point that's not where they intersect? Well, that occurs when the quantity supplied is not equal quantity demanded. And in this case, it would occur at any quantity other than 200 slices of pizza from our example. So as I mentioned with the charts or the tables, this can produce one of 2 outcomes: shortage or a surplus. Shortage, also known as excess demand, exists when the quantity demanded in a market is more than the quantity supplied. When the actual price in a market is below the equilibrium price, you have a shortage because the low price encourages buyers but discourages sellers. As long as there is a shortage and the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied, suppliers will keep raising the price until they find the highest price that the market will bear. And suppliers will continue to sell at that price until some other factor changes, either the demand or the supply curve, thus creating a new equilibrium. Surplus, on the other hand, exists when the quantity supplied exceeds the quantity demanded, and the actual price of a good is higher than the equilibrium price. Suppliers will begin cutting their prices. As the prices falls, the quantity demanded will rise, and more customers will buy more. At the same time, suppliers will supply less. This process will continue until it pushes supply or prices reach the equilibrium point. Market forces will always push the market towards equilibrium. Sellers do not waste resources and want to maximize profits. And there's just another visual representation in the graph. Again, we see the equilibrium where they intersect. Anything above that means there's an excess supply. Anything below means there's an excess demand. All right. Then we have what's called price ceilings. And this is something a government may use. So markets tend toward equilibrium, but in some cases the government intervenes to control prices. So a price ceiling is the maximum price that can be legally charged for a good or service, and this is always set below the equilibrium point. The government may sometimes place price ceilings on some goods that are considered essential and might become too expensive for some consumers. A big example of this would be in New York City when the city introduced rent control on apartments in the 1940s, and there's still even rent controlled apartments today. Many of you know, cost of living in New York City is astronomically high. Apartments are considered essential, so the government felt they needed to step in. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy on price controls because you're basically telling a landlord how much they can charge for their good. So obviously, very anti-free market. The market must determine who will benefit from the price ceilings and who will be left out. This sometimes can lead to a laden list, discriminations, lottery systems, even bribery. May lead to decrease in quality too, as suppliers look for other avenues to increase profits. If you're a landlord and you can only charge this X amount for your apartment, probably not going to put much money back into it to keep it looking great. So those apartment buildings tend to become run down. They also lack incentives to work harder to attract new customers, as I mentioned. End in price ceilings like rent control benefit some and hurt others. The question is, does the benefit of end in price control outweigh the cost? And there's really no easy answer to that, or correct answer either. On the flip side, we have what is price floor. That's a minimum price set by the government that must be paid for a good or service. Government set price floors to ensure that certain sellers receive at least a minimum reward for their efforts. Minimum wage is the most common government imposed price floor, and we did a whole activity on the federal minimum wage law earlier this year. All right, so that's a wrap on section 1. Complete the review questions. They will be due by Monday the 18th, 9 a.m. Have a great day.